The Paracave Podcast, proudly brought to you by major sponsor Jack's Pale Ale, exclusively available at Parramatta Leisure Club, Shannon Cooney from Glenmore Park Realty, BTZD Clothing, and the official media partner of the Paracave Podcast, the Parramatta Times.
G'day, it's Gus Walland here from Gotcha for Life and Triple M. I'd love to invite you along to the Mental Fitness Gym. Go to the mentalfitnessgym.org. That is a place where you can pick up some exercises to build your mental fitness, to work on that emotional muscle, those muscles in your head that are so powerful. Please come and join us at the mentalfitnessgym.org for all that stuff to build your emotional muscle and your mental fitness.
Welcome to another episode of the Paracave Podcast. And now over to your host, Troy Warner, broadcasting live from the world-famous Paracave.
And yes, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Paracave Podcast. Troy Warner here, and welcome back to the interview-based podcast series that I have been doing with famous fans and fans of rugby league and also ex-players of the greatest game of all, rugby league. And today kicks off a 6-week series of interviews I've done. So I've done a few interviews over the last couple of weeks. I did have a little bit of leave from work, so I was able to get some done. And I just thought it would be a good way to sort of end the podcast for the year with a few more interviews. Don't worry, I will still be around with some podcast topics and also if there's any breaking news as well, but I will be taking a little bit of a break just due to work getting in the way there. Look, this is with this first interview is with Steve Carter, former Penrith Panthers premiership winner. He was part of the inaugural 1991 premiership winning team, also played for New South Wales, and also did have the most premiership games played for the Panthers record. That was until the prelim final this year between the Panthers and the Sharks, when Isaiah Yeo did break that record. Steve Carter played 243 games for the Penrith Panthers. Now, this was recorded a few weeks ago now, about a month ago. And look, what I am going to do now is I'm going to trial something different. Most of my interviews go for about 45 minutes to an hour. Look, I'm going to break these up into two parts. So this is part one of the Steve Carter interview, and I'll bring it out over 2 days. Now, I'm thinking probably a Wednesday and a Friday that I can bring out these interviews, and I think I'm just going to trial it. So please give me the feedback that if you like it that way or not, or if you would prefer it in one big hit. I just think sometimes an hour and just over an hour's worth of a podcast can be a little bit long, and I know sometimes about half an hour can be a little bit short because you're dying to hear the rest of it and you really want to get into it. But anyway, I just thought I'd trial that and see how that goes for this time. Now, this part one with Steve Carter, we talk about what life was like for a young Steve Carter, whereabouts he grew up, how rugby league came into his life, a team that he supported, his first grade debut, 1990, playing semi-finals and that grand final as well in 1990. Some charades in the city, that famous story about the Panthers players in the city, MG, and a few bottles of champagne and the like. Also, the tough times at the Penrith Panthers club, 1991 obviously, and Gus Gould, and lots of other things as well. So that will be part 1, so stay tuned on Friday for part number 2. So, and also just give me that feedback if you would like it that way or all in one go. So just trialing something different. But anyway, that's enough of me talking. Let's get into the interview with Steve Carter. I hope you really enjoy it, and it's over to you, Troy. And today on the podcast, we've got a very special guest, a premiership winner with the Penrith Panthers, the very first premiership won by the Panthers, also played State of Origin, and is the current game record holder until this week for the Penrith Panthers, playing 243 first-grade games for the Panthers. Welcome to the Para Cave podcast, Mr. Steve Carter.
Thanks, Troy. Great to be here, mate.
Not a problem. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, what was life like for a young Steve Carter growing up? And what did you get up to, and what sports were you playing as a young kid?
I was born in Crown Street in Sydney, but not long moved up to the Central Coast, a place called Wyong. Had 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters and a younger brother, so we had a big family. Mum and Dad actually lived at Seven Hills for a while, actually, down your way.
Okay, yeah.
Then we moved from there to the Central Coast to be close to their family. And I grew up playing football with the kids, my older brothers, which was good schooling, on the bed in the backyard. And I started playing footy around 4 years of age, I think it was. I annoyed Mum and Dad. They finally give in, and I had I think back then it was under 8s it started, and I had 3 years in the under 8, so they were sick of me come when I was actually the under 8 sort of. So I had a good apprenticeship, and good older brothers sort of kept me in line. So.
And was rugby league the sport then that you always wanted to play in the future, or growing up?
Yeah, it was. My mum's father was heavily involved with refereeing and the game. He had a bit of a connection with Balmain and some of the Keith Barnes and some people involved with the Tigers. I used to go for the Tigers as a kid growing up. So, rugby league, it was in my blood, and I just loved that competitive component that, you didn't really get in too many other sports. Sort of, you had to get over your opponent. And I like the team factor. So, I always had my eyes set on it was only a dream, because even though at Wyong, we're only an hour and a half or 2 hours back then with the old roads from Sydney, but the NR or the rugby league was just like a fairy tale land where we watched it on TV, and these amazing people who could play the game at the top level. It was just a dream, and later on I was lucky enough to fulfill that dream. Yeah.
You mentioned there that you supported Balmain. Who were some of the favourite players back in the day watching him play?
One of my favourites was Neil Pringle. I know him and Lee Price used to have some tussles. I actually do a few men of league days because Bing is living up at the Gold Coast and I'm up the mid-north coast, so I come across him a fair bit, and I reminisce about him, Coxie, David Brooks, Junior Pearce, and I ended up playing against some of those fellas, and some of the heroes like Sterlo and Kenny. I was lucky enough to play against them. They were on their way out, but it was a very big eye-opening experience playing against Sterlo one day at Parramatta Stadium. It was just amazing how he had control of the whole show, and he wasn't nowhere near his best at that point either. So it was...
Yeah, no, certainly. Well, just before, you made your debut against Illawarra in first grade, but seeing as though we're talking about Balmain a little bit, I want to talk about that game, your third, I think it was about your third first grade game. It was a playoff game to make the semi-finals against Balmain at Parramatta Stadium. And just what was it like playing against Wayne Pearce, Benny Elias, Steve Blocker-Roach, Paul Sheridan, Ellery Hanley? The list goes on. What was it like playing against them in your first
amazing grade? I was at Wyong. I was in year 10 at school, and my mum and Dad said, "Look, what do you want to do?" It was a bit of a pivotal point because I was 16, and back then, like there was under 17s, was SG ball, I think, and I'd played representative football as a kid, and it was sort of something I said, "Well, I want to try play football
Yep.
and go and try compete with the best." So yeah, it all happened very quick in a matter of 12 months. It was in year 12 at school, I think, when that game unfolded, and yeah, the likes of Ellery Hanley. Um, and Junior Pearce and Blocker and Zero and those types of players is just I supported and
Yeah.
loved, and all of a sudden you're up against them. It's quite scary actually in that game. I'm not sure who did it. It could have been Ellery Hanley who actually cleaned up Chris Mortimer,
Okay.
who was playing 5'8", and I'm on the bench shitting in my boots because there was me and Cole Bentley on the bench, and I'm thinking, not me, don't pick me. It might have been Ron Willie coaching, and Cole Bentley was an older fella, so Cole went on because Ellery had knocked out Chris Mortimer. With a bit of a high shot, but never forget those sort of experiences. It was just I was happy just there to watch
Yeah.
watch the game.
From one of the best seats in the house, no doubt, there on the bench there. But 1989, you start to play more consistent, regular first grade, and Penrith make the semis. Again, I think it was their second time in their history that they made it. Could you sense then that late 80s period that something special was brewing at the club?
Yeah, there was. I say my mum helped me write letters to St George, Balmain, and Penrith before I left the Central Coast, and at that time they were bringing in things called scholarships.
Okay.
And they weren't big amounts of money, but they help you with accommodation and schooling and whatnot, because I had to finish year 11 and 12. So St George had come and watched me play in my grand final at Graham Park, Central Coast Stadium now. And they said, yes, we want you to come. We've just got to get the scholarship scheme approved at the board level, but it got knocked back. And then Ross Gigg and the Tigers were interested, but Ross Gigg actually got this scholarship scheme passed, and I think it was only $2,000 or something. But back then, I could help pay my way because they put me with a family. And Ron and Marge Payer, who coincidentally, Marge grew up with my mother. She lost her parents at an early age, and they lived at Penrith. So it was a bit of a return the favour where I went and lived with them, and I still keep in touch. I was down there the other weekend with the old boys' day, and I stopped with their son Scott in the same house that I was at when I first went. But I was only young, and as it turned out, Penrith was the club. And my dad always said, I recall, he said, well, Penrith are on the way up. And even in 85, you could see Brandy, Izzard and Royce, but they're a club on the way up. Their juniors were growing. Yep. Obviously, Parramatta were the big brothers, sort of as far as juniors, and pretty much control all that space. But Penrith were actually making inroads in that late 80s. So, yeah, my old man sort of said, mate, Penrith will be a club that you're going to be a chance of winning a comp down the track if you can get through the grades. So it was a definite feeling in the area that we were on the way up. Parrot had their great period in the early mid-80s and that, but it was a bit of fresh blood in there, and we're actually starting to compete with some of them great sides. So definitely thought that we were on the up, no risk. Yeah.
Yeah, well, 1990, you played pretty much every single game that season, including the semis and the grand final. But first, to that semi-final against Canberra, you beat them 30 points to 12. And then that must have given you confidence then going into the grand final against that same team. Yeah,
it did. I don't know if that one, did it go extra time at May? And we won convincingly in extra time, I think. It was maybe a wet day in 90. But yeah, we were a bunch of young lunatics other than Royce and a couple of older ones. So we sort of thought this is easy. and now we know we were very, very wrong.
Yeah.
Getting to those sort of opportunities, it's not very easy. It's very difficult. So, the likes of Freddie, myself, and a few other young guys who come through, we sort of probably took that year for granted and didn't give it the respect. Preparation-wise, in 1990, we had the grand final breakfast, and us Westies went into some motel in Sydney, Flash Motel, and
The infamous story in
and the
MG's room, was it?
Yeah, it was probably MG's room. And we drank till probably well into the hours of the morning. Went to the breakfast, had a day off, and then was getting ready to play grand final. And you look back and you think how ludicrous that is. But we were young. Royce was probably the only one. Royce and probably one or two others. The older fellas were the only ones. Didn't know what happened. He wasn't part of the party because he knew how hard it was to get to those opportunities. So he was pretty pissed off with us, to say the least.
Were you in the room when Gus knocked on the door?
I was, yes.
Where did you try and hide?
Yeah, I rolled from one side of the bed down underneath the other, but I think he knew who was there, and pretty much everyone except Royce and maybe one other. But yeah, we evacuated quick smart, but the damage had been done.
Because I've heard MG talk about that, and he said not only, well, obviously not that, but the street parades, the open training sessions, and Penrith probably didn't treat it as a normal game. They treated it as a celebration the week before the grand final. Was that a bit of a distraction as well leading into that game?
Well, looking back, you could say yes, because you've got to get everything right to win that win the grand final. And I think the town would celebrate the coming of age. They'd made it. I think they were happy with that.
Yeah.
And so was I at the time.
Yeah, definitely.
And the younger fellas, but yeah, as I say, it's very hard to put old heads on young shoulders.
Yeah.
And Penrith, as an up-and-coming city, it was a bush town back then, virtually, a big country town, as you know. It had thought it had come of age. It had recognition, which it never had. So, yeah, I think they thought just making it was good enough, and it was a blown opportunity when you look back. Up against a great side who were the better team on the day, but we probably should have made them earn it a bit more, I'd say.
Well, you learnt that lesson, I guess, the next year, 1991, New Jerseys. You went from the chocolate soldiers to the licorice all sorts.
Yeah.
What was that the motivation to go one better, or goal to go one better and win that premiership that year?
Yeah,
after losing it.
We're only 12 months older, but we're a lot the wiser. Still young, still 21, me and Freddie. I think he was 20, a year younger than me. And so we realised how we failed the year before. It was actually a story there. One of our last training sessions was at the barracks, and it was a hidden training session, and they might have been the weekend off because we beat North Sydney, luckily. Daryl Halligan missed a few sitters, choked. Unfortunately, Daryl, we never missed any all year. So we're lucky to go through, and we had a training session, got flogged out at the barracks, and I don't know whether Gus and Royce had set it up, but there was a massive esky, and it was full of ice. I don't know if there's any beer in there, but after the session, Gus said, "Right, we had a hard session. You just want to have a beer?"
Okay, a test.
And he kicked it and said, "It's there if you want to have it, or do you want to try and make some sacrifices this year?" And we all said, no beer this weekend. We're going to fail like we did last year with that. So, but as I say, it still don't know if there's any beer in it. Royce was the first to say, "No effing way, we're going to be having a beer. We've got to learn from our mistakes." So that was one interesting story on the weekend off.
Yeah.
And Gus sort of had a good analogy. We were getting on a train heading to Central, and each round of the competition, if we perform well, we've got to Kingswood. Or if we're at Parramatta and we got beat by a side or didn't play well, oh, well, mate, no, we're back at St Mary's train station, fellas. We're not there. So it was like an analogy. You got to do a lot of things right all that year, just like the likes of Melbourne and Penrith. Melbourne more so this year, but you've got to just do so many things right because come that big day, you've got to have a game that's going to hold up. And if you're inconsistent and you're missing things and taking shortcuts, you just don't win. And luckily enough, it turned out we did get to Central Station and we got the trophy. So
That's it. Well, you were the starting number 6 for Penrith that day, behind 12-6 at half time. Did you think that you could come back in that second half, even with MG got sent to the sin bin?
yeah, I honestly, like you can bullshit, but I honestly believe, and I believe that every person in our team knew we had Canberra. They had a couple of fellas sort of not 100%, and we just knew because we had done it through the year, just stuck to that grinding of kick the ball into the corner. We'll get our opportunity. We got an opportunity. It got disallowed the try. No, well, let's just start again and persevere. So there was real confidence and I could feel it, and I'm pretty sure all the team did. Otherwise, it just wouldn't have come off. So, yeah, we had confidence. We went into half time, and things didn't go our way a couple of times, and we started well, and then started to fall back, and it might have been a kick. The bounce went the wrong way, or something with Smitty, and but there was confidence. Gus give us a bit of a rev, no risk, to get us in the right frame of mind. But there was belief, and like all successful teams, you got to have that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, did you feel like you'd won the grand final when Brad Izzard scored and you're pointing to the post, or was that just to make Brandy's kick easier?
I never won a grand final, even when we was 7 or whatever up, whatever it was. I was still worried from the kickoff. MG and all the other larrikins, they were, yeah. I'm just you never know.
Calm down.
8 point try, anything. So I was never until I heard that whistle.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, there was a few of the fellas celebrating before they kicked off afterwards, kicking the field goal, I think it was. So.
And then it's probably something that only you can describe, but how was that feeling when that full-time hooter went and you'd won Penrith's first premiership?
Yeah, it was relief, I think was probably the best way to describe it, Troy. It was because we'd missed an opportunity the year before, there was relief. Like Royce, he didn't have a great year that year. I don't think he played much first grade till the back end. So Gus really managed that well. There was a couple of young hookers that were Scotty Ellum and Benny Alexander were playing in the hooking role, and they were playing better than Royce all year. But that was the genius of Gus, that he knew that he could get 4 good weeks out of Royce, and that's pretty much all his body had left in him.
Yeah.
That was relief that we'd done it for him, because we really did let him down the year before as a group, the young fellas. So that was relief, and we felt good that we sent him out the way he should be sent out too. So.
And no doubt the celebrations were pretty wild. How were they after the grand final?
They were long. The celebrations in 90 were big, but they were bigger in 91.
Yeah.
We celebrated the loss in 90, unfortunately, but as I say, that was part of the town. They were just happy. But 91 went longer and harder, went for 3 or 4 days, and then we had to have 2 days break to get on a plane and go and play Wigan at Anfield.
Yeah.
So that was always going to be an uphill battle. So.
What was that experience like, playing overseas?
It was great. Yeah, it was great. Again, back then there was no real recognition of the World Club Challenge.
No, was there?
No, it was a week between. We'd won the comp, drank for 3 or 4 days, had a day off maybe, got on the plane, drank for another 2 or 3 days over there, went to the Cavern where the Beatles in Liverpool were based, and drank for 2 or 3 days, had a day off, and then tried to overcome a 20-2 penalty count against a pretty good Wigan side. So, I think it was 2 tries to 1, but they beat us by about 16 points or something. They've just Frano Bodica kicked about 12 goals or something. So, but, great experience, and I was lucky enough to go back and play a bit later and enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, just before we talk about a bit more about Penrith, you did play for Widnes over there in England. How does it compare to playing in Australia, the two different games?
Yeah, it's different. It's probably a different style of footy. It probably suited me a little bit better towards the end of my career. I wasn't playing that great in my last couple of years. My body was bashed and buggered, but the game over there, I really enjoyed the 12 months because it was quite a physical sort of game. It may have changed a little bit now with the rules, but I totally enjoyed the style of football over there. If looking back, it would have been probably good to go a bit earlier,
Okay.
and I would have enjoyed it even more. But in saying that, I wouldn't have played with Penrith, so I enjoyed my time there, even though the back end was a bit tough. But that's footy. Yeah, but the English people, mate, the crowds and that, it's a very good experience.
I've heard that one. They really get behind their teams, and in your team was former South Sydney coach Jason Demetriou. What was he like as a player?
Jace was interesting. He was always an analytical sort of player. He sometimes got on my nerves because
Okay.
I was the captain. He was only a young fella, and he was an up and comer, and I was at the end of my career, and we may concede a try, and we're behind the bloody goalposts, and Jason would be trying to work out what went wrong, and trying to unpack the whole set of six,
Okay.
and I'd end up saying, in more colourful language, for Christ's sake, Jace, forget about it. So-and-so dropped the ball, that was it, end of story. But he would always, and that now, he loves coaching, obviously, and has become a very good coach. I can see why he was like that. He always wanted to get an explanation or justify what happened when I couldn't give a rat's. Let's worry about the next.
Next set, next
Yeah.
play. Yeah, I think actually he's been appointed the PNG coach. I think for the
Yeah,
Pacific
yeah,
Championships
done
coming
well.
up.
So, pretty
Yeah.
cutthroat old coaching game, but Troy.
Yeah, definitely for sure. Well, a tough year in 1992 for the Penrith club and also the community as well of Penrith, and with the sad passing of Ben Alexander. You were his halves partner in his last first grade game against Parramatta. But how did yourself and the Penrith club get through that really difficult time?
Yeah, it took a while. Obviously, Brandy and MG being family, it just they needed to change. They needed to get away from it. So understandably, they had to go a different path. But I never really considered moving from Penrith.
Okay.
They've been good to me, and I knew there was tough times ahead. The recruitment wasn't great after 91, even the 92 side before. But I think we might have got a fair majority of lower grade Parramatta players, Phil Adamson and Matty, and
Yeah.
I think Woodsy might have come across. So I don't think they really Gus. This is on Gus, but it's also Roger Cowan as well, because Roger's sort of focus was more on the clubland. Rugby league, and I'd be a bit critical of Gus with his recruitment after 91, but he was hamstrung financially with Roger only playing by the rules, where a lot of other clubs who wouldn't spend more money. So, and to Gus's credit, when he returned not long back, the focus went back on football.
Yeah.
The rugby league club is here because of football, not the football's here because the other way around. So, Gus probably didn't have the resources to recruit and keep going. So we had an unsuccessful year in 92. I missed the 8, I'm pretty sure, and then we had Ben's accident, and I was as close as anyone other than the family with Ben. I lived with the family when we were about 18 or 19. We went selling vacuums. Those fancy vacuums, we thought we're going to be millionaires. I was saying, what are we going to do with all this money that we make?
You
I don't think either
won't
of
have
us
to play
sold
football.
rainbows. I think they were back in the day, the early 90s or late 80s. Said this is going to be easy, but neither of us sold one. But yeah, it was a tough time. And yeah, Brandy and MG just needed to go get out of the place. Too many memories, and but it was tough for the club on the field too. It's probably a period that I'm probably most proud of, even though I didn't achieve a hell of a lot in
Okay.
results.
Yeah.
But to be there and just to hang in there and compete and keep backing up and keeping the club relatively competitive, with a group of blokes who really played above themselves. We were down at the old boys the other week, and there's so many of those fellas who played a bit of reserve grade, a bit of first grade, sort of in and out, but gutsy 100% players that give it all through a really difficult period. So it's a period that I think Cardi was still there until he went overseas, but I'm pretty proud of that period of my career because of just knuckling down. Could have took the easy option and got an offer and went elsewhere, but
Okay. Yep.
no, I'm pretty proud of that part.
Ah, nice, nice. Well, one highlight definitely for yourself during that difficult year was you made your State of Origin debut against Queensland at Lang Park. Nevertheless, what was your origin experience like in the lead up to the game and the actual game at the Cauldron?
Yeah, it was wonderful. We actually played country origin, city origin, and back then it used to be a genuine trial for the New South Wales side, and we actually coached by Mick Cronin and the great Crow, and amazing humble person. I was
Yeah,
very
he
lucky
is.
to get coached by him, and he had Ronnie Massey come in for the
Okay.
week,
Yeah.
country origin, and that was a great experience. And Mick, we ended up beating City. We're underdogs and beat them. We had a pretty good side to Chief and myself and a lot of great players. And Mick, as it come out after we'd won, the last time country origin had beaten City was when Mick Cronin played for country.
Okay. Yeah. No, it had been a
17
while. I remember that. Yeah.
17 years prior was the last time that country beat City, so it was a good occasion, and I was playing very good football, and Gus was coaching, so that helped. And they said, look, we're going to move Laurie to centres. This is after country origin, and unfortunately, I was at Cronulla before they picked the first side because I was told I was going to be in the side, and
Okay.
Andrew Eddinghausen made a break with about 2 minutes to go, and silly me decides to try chase him down and tore me hamstring.
Oh no.
Unfortunately, I blew an opportunity. Laurie's obviously a better 5'8" and far better player than me, but at that point, they were going to move Laurie to the centres to accommodate myself because I was playing quite well. But trying to chase down ET crippled that opportunity. But my hamstring come good a little bit, but I think they won the first one. We went up there and I was on the bench, and Alfie kicked the ugliest field goal you'll ever
It's pretty
see
wobbly, wasn't it?
to win 5-4. So then it went into a decider, and I actually did my sternum, and I didn't play in the third one. But yeah, a bit of a moment in time that was great. The week was great.
Yeah.
Mixing and having a drink with some of these fellas that you looked up to, really, to be honest. And the intensity of that football is probably a little bit above the grand final type intensity again. So
Did the bus go down Caxton Street in those days?
it did, yeah.
What was that like? Because it
I had
doesn't happen now.
similar feelings when I was sitting on the bench when Ellery Hand the Pearl knocked Chris
Okay.
Mortimer out. I was
Yeah.
sweating bullets, thinking, "Oh, right, okay," because I remember when the beer cans and all that not long before then. So yeah, pretty good experience, but not sure what it's like now. Whether they
No,
do it.
well, I reckon they don't go down there now, but I reckon they should somehow bring it back. I think. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
Origin folklore, isn't it? I guess
It is
safety standards these days probably aren't in place for that to happen.
Yeah, Politically correct, a lot of things these days.
Yeah, that's true. That's for sure.
Hello, Paracave podcast listeners. My name is Shannon Cooney from Glenmore Park Realty and long-term sponsor of the Paracave podcast. If you're looking to sell your property or buy, or just curious to know what your property is worth in today's market, give me a call today on 0421 588 445.
And yes, welcome back to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed part one with Steve Carter, former premiership winner with the Penrith Panthers. Part two will be out on Friday. I really hope you enjoy that one. There is still plenty more in the episode to talk about. Things like Super League, also being coached by a former teammate, that in Royce Simmons, playing Parramatta throughout his career as well, talking about Isaiah Yeo, and also playing footy over in England as well. So, and a couple of listener questions as well. So I think there is in there as well. So there's some great stuff in there. So stay tuned for part two. And once again, please give me the feedback if you would like the episode all in one or split up like this one in part one and part two. And we will see what we can do over the next few weeks. Just trying to keep you guys entertained the best way and working with you guys, the listeners, because that's who it's all about. I do everything that I do for you guys. So whatever's easiest for you, I'm happy to accommodate, so you can get your listening pleasure, I guess, from the interviews. So let me know if you like it in this format, whether you like the interviews to be split over the 2 days in a row or a Wednesday and a Friday. Just let me know. I'm happy to hear the feedback. So anyway, thank you for listening to part one. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating and review. Please give the podcast page a follow on Instagram and Facebook as well, and share it with your family and friends. So thank you very much. The Paracave podcast, by the fan, for the fans.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Paracave podcast. See you next time.